start recording. There we go. Okay, so Zeno is going to talk to us today about land fraud and 1031 exchanges. We are seeing a lot of people that purchased their home within the last couple of years that have capital gains to worry about, things of that nature, but they want to tap into that equity, right? And so they're selling. They're like, how do I make sure that I'm protected? So 1031. And then we're also seeing, as you guys know, a lot of absentee landowners coming out the woodwork to sell their land, but then come to find out it's not even their land to be selling. They're not the right person and stuff. So he's going to go over some best practices with that. And then we'll dive into a little bit more of mobile closings, the process, things of that nature. If you guys have questions, please, jump in at any time and ask them. And with that being said, I'm going to mute my big mouth and turn my video off and turn it over to Zeno.
Thank you, Alexis. Thanks, guys, for having me this morning. So I do classes all over the state of North Carolina. I've done this vacant land fraud class in Charlotte, Fayetteville, Wilmington, Chapel Hill, of course, in Asheville and Hendersonville, where I'm based. It's a growing problem. And so I want to talk to it. Talk about it. I think it's very important. What you guys are doing, coming to a class, learning about it, that's a big piece of how we fight it. So I'm going to get to that. I figure I'll dive into 1031 exchanges first, because it's a little faster of a discussion. I can answer questions on that. Basically, when I talk about 1031 exchanges, I really whittle it down because it's not as complicated as people might think. And I also think it's a lot of missed opportunities for realtors because they just don't want to wrap their minds around it. So they don't tap into that opportunity. But you all know someone, if you're busy realtors, you know someone who owns investment property. That is a lead right there for you on a 1031 exchange. Now, if they just bought it, maybe not, right? But if they've moved, you even have clients that have moved here that might own investment properties where they used to live. That is a lead for you. If nothing else, you can give a referral to wherever they moved from and then help them buy their replacement property up here. So you can make money on both sides of it and help them do a 1031 exchange and get investment property that might be a little bit more manageable where they live now, right? So 1031 exchanges, here's my spiel on it, and it's a quick one. And hopefully you guys will take away from this that it is a little bit more simple than you think. So I will tell you right away, you cannot do 1031 exchanges on personal residences or second homes. Can't do it. So if it's a primary residence or a second home, you can't defer capital gains taxes on that through a 1031 exchange. It has to be investment property. So other than that, well, Zeno, what does like kind mean? All you need to know, in my opinion, is that like kind means investment property. You can sell vacant land and use that money to buy an apartment complex, or vice versa. You can sell an apartment, a duplex, and use that money to buy 5 pieces of vacant land. You can do whatever you want as long as it's investment property. It's not a primary or secondary residence. It does not work on.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So we have found, well, I have found, I don't know about everybody else on this call, but what I have been seeing is a lot of agents out there saying you can on a primary, you can 1031 a primary residence. It's totally doable. And so what you're saying is absolutely not. Those agents are woefully misinformed, right?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to confirm. And there's no like loopholes or workarounds, right?
I mean, not that I'm aware of, guys. I've done a lot of research on this. I guess the IRS could have put out, excuse me, an exception, in the past year that I haven't seen that allows you to do that, but I'm not aware of any exceptions. My understanding is 1031 deferred capital gains is simply meant for investment property.
Right.
I'll take, yeah.
Could you keep your primary residence that you've got right now, buy a second home? Obviously you'd be doing 20% down, so on and so forth, but then sell that first home you had and do 1031 there because it's a second home.
It depends. I'll tell you that. And if you guys have if you have one you're trying to do that with, reach out to me. I'll put my cell phone in. And Alexis, I'm gonna send you some some PDFs I put together on all this information. And guys, my phone number will be on there. Maybe we can put it in the chat too. Text or call me if you have a client and you're wondering if you can do it. I'll help you with it. Of course, I would love to work with you on the closing, but I'll absolutely help you with it, and we can jump through those hoops. There is certainly a way where you own a home and then you move to a second home and you no longer live in the first home. At some point that becomes investment property, right? And we can jump through those hoops. But I'm going to tell you, if you've lived in that house in the past year, you're probably not going to be able to defer it with 1031 exchange. But basically, we can work with a qualified intermediary, which holds the funds, which I'll talk about in a second. And they're very good at saying, listen, here are the hoops you got to jump through before you can do that. And maybe you've jumped through them. Maybe we're there now. And that's the kind of thing I can help with. But right away, you're going to want to assume, I'll tell you, it's rare that someone sells their primary through a 1031 exchange. So it's not impossible, but most of the time you're talking about investment properties.
And I just wanted to make sure, because you know how I am, I'm very big on putting the right information out there. And so I love hearing this from you, because now I can be like, hey, per the attorney that knows how to do this, and not some Joe Schmo agent off the street trying to get you as a lead, right? Because that's ultimately what it comes down to, is giving misinformation, getting them signed in, and then, oh, I'm so sorry, we can't do it because of this or that. And so I'd rather our clients, guys, be informed straight off the bat, and use Zeno as a resource where you can, because it's not just us telling them that. This is an actual attorney telling them that too. And then I'm sure Zeno has recommendations. I have recommendations for CPAs and financial advisors that'll tell them the same thing. And you're going to have some clients that go on Google and, they've got their financial advisory and CPA certifications from Google University, and they're going to see someone said you could. And we want to make sure that they're completely informed. I'm sure somebody out there has done it at some point in time, like Zeno said, but did they do it correctly? Did they do it legally? Is it going to come back and bite them in the butt for fraud later on? We don't know. So we want our clients to be as informed as possible. And I'll shut up now. Sorry, on my second cup of coffee, Zeno. So
that's okay. Yeah. Yeah. And the biggest thing is this happens in several different areas, right? I always get online, and I probably sound preachy and condescending. I really don't mean to, but be really careful as a realtor out there taking on liability you shouldn't. Be really careful giving legal advice. Be really careful giving tax advice. I don't give tax advice. Be really careful with that, because they will, if something goes wrong, even if you came close to it, they're going to point at you a year or two later and say, you told me to do it this way, licensed professional from the state, and I followed your advice. So be really careful with that. And for goodness sakes, yes, please use me as a tool to remove yourself from that liability on all things like this, because I'll take over and it's not going to cost anybody anything. So please don't take that on if you don't have to. But I'll tell you this, you can send these people to the IRS website. And I've got a little cheat sheet here that helps me with the days, because I always somewhat forget the time periods you have to act on these. But on this same page, it says, let's see, property primarily used for personal use, like a primary residence or a second home or a vacation home, does not qualify for a like-kind exchange treatment. That's straight from the IRS. Like I say, unless they've changed something in the past year that I'm not aware of, you can't typically do places you're using as a primary or secondary. So let's say we get it qualified. You call me and say, look, they're wanting to sell that first house they bought. Can we do it? We find out we can. And listen, deferring their capital gains doesn't mean they have to pay them if we can't, right? So you really have two conversations. You have that primary residence, we want to sell it. Are we going to have to pay capital gains? Well, that's a loaded question. There's will we have to pay capital gains? And then there's, we definitely have to, can we defer them, right? Because on a primary residence, there are different capital gains rules. So if you owned it for a while, and again, we're going to confirm this as a CPA, because I do not give tax advice. So don't say Zeno said this, say Zeno said to confirm this with your CPA. But if you own it for a while, you don't necessarily have to pay capital gains on it. So this might be solved anyway on a primary residence. You might want to claim it's a primary residence so you don't have to pay them. You might not want to call it investment property, because again, with investment property, you're not getting out of it, you're deferring it until later. And a lot of people they call them, basically flip till you drop. Like, you just keep doing these throughout your life and you never pay the capital gains on it. You pass away, your estate handles all of that, right? And you build up your portfolio that way, and it can pay you a nice passive income, from these investment properties or whatever. You can leave it to your kids and, whatever. So lots of benefits to doing a 1031 exchange because you don't have to pay those capital gains when you sell, which is, by the way, a big reason people with commercial property and investment property don't want to sell. So you're talking to someone, they're like, yeah, that sounds great, but my God, how much taxes am I going to have to pay on that? A lot of times you can defer a lot of it with these 1031 exchanges, which gets them off the fence. And let's face it, gets you a commission on the sale potentially. So let's say we qualify this property to qualify for a 1031 exchange, whether it's a primary residence or not. Again, it needs to be investment property typically. Basically, what happens is you need to get with, in my opinion, get with me or someone like me, but get with me. And I'm going to connect that client with a qualified intermediary. This person, this company will hold the money from the sale and until we find the purchase. If you close a sale and the attorney hands a check or wires the proceeds to your seller and they say, well, that was fun, I'm gonna 1031 this thing, disqualified. The seller cannot touch the money. If the seller touches the money, you cannot do a 1031 exchange. So again, the theme is talk to me early and let's make sure it's done correctly. Okay. Tell the closing attorneys, for goodness sakes, that it's a 1031 exchange, because we know the hoops that you need to jump through. And say, I'm a big The Office fan, and Michael Scott walks into the office and he screams, I declare bankruptcy. And that doesn't do anything. So saying it's a 1031 exchange doesn't do anything. There are hoops we have to jump through. But attorneys are pretty typically savvy on that sort of thing. I've got a company I love to use, but we can use whoever the seller or buyer wants to, of course. But I like a certain company because they are quick to answer questions. They don't charge anything up front, yada, yada. They'll help a client figure out whether the property is perfect for a 1031 exchange, that sort of thing. So this intermediary holds the money. We send all the money to them. You have 45 days from the date of that sale to identify what you're going to use that money to buy. Please don't wait until you sell the property to start looking, because it's only 45 days and it might go by faster than you think. So go ahead and start looking for property. If you think you have a seller that's going to do a 1031 exchange, I mean, you should really be doing this anyway, because this is how you guys get paid. So go ahead and start looking for that replacement property, and have a conversation with them early on. Hey, you want to do a 1031 exchange on this property? What are you looking to buy with that money? How are we looking to flip that? You have 45 days to identify in writing. Basically, you tell the 1031 exchange company, the QI, qualified intermediary, this is the property we're trying to get. They do give you a little bit of leeway if you're trying. Okay, so but you typically need to try to identify that property within 45 days. You then have, gosh, I messed up my cheat sheets here, 180 days to close on that property, or you have to close on that purchase by the date of the date that your tax returns due for that current year. So around April of the following year, or within 180 days, whichever is earlier. Okay. So if you close on December 31st, you've got to close by the date that tax day, I guess, which is a weird quirk. It really doesn't come up very often. Generally, you have 180 days from the sale to actually close, which is a lot longer than 45, right? So you just have to get it under, you have to identify it within 45. You have to end up closing it 180. If all of this falls apart and it doesn't happen, they have to pay capital gains. So that's what I guess what the worst case scenario is. They have to pay capital gains on the profits they made on the sale. So it's not like they get arrested. The money would be released to the client, and they would have to pay. They would ultimately owe, most likely, taxes on those capital gains. But if you are able to identify that property and close on it within 180 days, and it's it's investment property, you can defer the capital gains taxes on that money. If there's money, let's say you have $150,000 in 1031 deferment, you sold your property for 150 and you find a property for 140, that $10,000 is called a boot, like a boot you wear. That $10,000, you're going to have to pay capital gains taxes on that. It won't be much, right? But you're going to have to pay capital gains on that little piece. So you either have to use all of it, or you have to pay capital gains on whatever piece you don't use. So generally speaking, people usually upgrade just a little bit, if nothing else, or they're okay paying that small amount. I think that's all I've got on 1031 exchanges. Any questions?
You did a great job. Does anybody here have any questions about 1031s? All right, no questions about 1031. Let's rock and roll on land fraud.
Okay, guys, I'm here to tell you this is a much more important topic for you right now. First of all, 1031 exchanges are all going to help you get through it. But vacant land fraud is happening. It's happening right now. You all know someone it's happening to. You just don't know it's happening, right? So vacant land fraud, if you don't know what it is, here's generally what happens. You got a piece of vacant land, and someone reaches out to you and says, wow, you know what, you're a great listing agent. Thanks for putting yourself out there on social media and marketing and all of that. I would love for you to list my vacant land. My name's Bob Smith. As you can see, Bob Smith owns this piece of vacant land. I'll sign your agreement today. Can you send it over? In fact, I need to sell this because I've got something I need the money for. And I'll tell you what, if you can sell it in a week, I'm going to give you a bonus. And I'll go ahead and give you whatever commission you want. And I'm going to sell it for under market price just to make sure it sells quickly. What do you say? And there are not a lot of realtors out there just swimming in business like they were 2 or 3 years ago. As we know, it's a little harder right now. So why turn down quick money? And what they try to do is Bob Smith tries to get you to do it so quickly that you don't ask questions. And I'm talking about you, the buyer's agent, the attorneys involved, the buyer. Don't ask questions. It's such a good deal, man. We won't think about things being too good to be true. We're just going to get this done because it's easy money. And you know, they generally just push you to do it quickly. And what happens is they aren't the real Bob Smith. And no one's on the property. You don't have to let someone into the house. In fact, the real Bob Smith lives in California. The only indication to the real Bob Smith that he even still owns this property is he gets a tax bill in the mail every fall, once a year. So, you know, he may not have any idea. Maybe that Bob Smith's passed away and it's now owned by his grandson. His grandson, same thing, you know, he had never even seen the property. But you know, it's things like that that can happen. And people are closing on these and wiring the money to the fake Bob Smith. And then years later, the real Bob Smith notices he hasn't received that tax bill he's used to getting every fall. And he starts looking into it. And there's a house on the land now owned, you know, the buyer built a house there. And you and I have certified they own it. They don't. And it is a growing problem. And I'm going to tell you more about that in a second. But I'm sure some of you are sitting back and what happens there? Exactly. Great question. Okay. And so I'm going to tell you my thoughts on it, where we are with it, and how to avoid it mostly. So I'll tell you right now, if you're like, oh crap, I might have had one of those last month. There's no judgment here. 2 or 3 years ago, nobody was looking into this. We weren't worried about it. It wasn't happening, frankly, that we knew about. And if I got a signed and notarized deed from California from Bob Smith, public record says Bob Smith owns it. I didn't do the seller documents. I didn't sign. I'm not the notary that stamped it. Who am I to say it's not valid? And under the state law, it says it's valid. I mean, what else am I supposed to do? I don't know that it's fraud. I had no idea. So closing attorneys all over the state and nation, and title companies where that applies have been closing these. And now we're into that couple of years later period where people are starting to be like, where's my tax bill? Or some other indication shows up that, what? They look on Zillow, you know, how much is my land worth now? And there's a freaking house sitting on it. So, you know, it's starting to come up. And so that's what vacant land fraud is, right? So that's how they push you to get away with it. It's a fake seller purporting to be the real seller. And there's very little way to know up front that they're not the real seller. And it's awkward to question it, right? So we're going to talk about all that. So I'm curious, has anyone in here had any experiences with land fraud yet that they're willing to just raise your hand? I mean, I don't need a story just now, but has anyone had it, seen it, or in the wild at their agencies or on one of their deals?
I have personally had it happen. Well, I caught it before it could happen, but I've had someone try it with me.
Yeah, I will
It's
tell
very
you guys.
these
Go ahead.
assignable deals that like you can get in a shit ton of trouble doing assignable deals. And what that is where you have a middleman, so to speak. So Zeno has land. I go to Zeno. I say, Zeno, I'm going to give you 40,000 for this land, but you're going to sign this purchase agreement, and it makes it assignable, right? Then I take that and I go to Josh and I say, hey, Josh, I have this land I'm selling for 60,000. You sign that. Well, Zeno gets his 40,000. Josh buys it for 60. I walk away with 20,000. Never had anything in the deal whatsoever. But here's where it can get tricky. Well, how does Josh know that Zeno really signed that assignable contract with me? I just walked away with 60 grand. So be very careful on those two.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So here's we had one person chime in. It's more than that. I hate to tell you guys. I'm telling you, all know someone it's happened to you. They don't know it's happening to them yet. So certified ID, I don't know, whichever one you want to call it. They are a wire fraud insurance company. I don't use them because they are ridiculously expensive, but they are very good. And my wire fraud insurance is also very expensive. So none of it's cheap. But in any event, they are a growing wire fraud insurance company. They put out a survey last year, and this was in October of 2023. So we're 6 months past that, right? In October of 2023, in the previous 6 months, 54% of the real estate professionals they surveyed had experienced at least one seller impersonation fraud attempt. So they themselves, 54% had a seller try to hire them and try to sell their land. That's over half. 77% of the people they surveyed knew someone at their agency or a colleague that it had happened to. I'm here to tell you those numbers are very low. They're not realistic. It is much higher than that. Those are the ones they know about and caught. A lot of these people are just closing them. And so, like I talked about, so I'm telling you, all of you know someone that's happening to, and you need to be very careful with it. But we're going to talk all about that. So there's not a whole lot you can do at this point to combat what's happened in the past. So what we have to do is make sure we try to prevent it in the future, which I'm going to talk about. So I've reached out to the state bar and I've reached out to the commission. There are licensure boards. There are bosses in some ways, right? They get to say whether we can do this for a living or not. State bar, what would you have me do if I find out a vacant land fraud situation is happening on one of my closings? I stopped it, but what do you expect from me? They kind of just shrugged their shoulders and they're like, well, you can contact the authorities if you want to, but you don't have to. What authorities? We don't really know. It was a hilarious answer from my wise board in Raleigh, because they will come after attorneys for the most hilarious things, but apparently they don't really care what we do on land fraud, which is blew my mind. I contacted the commission, the real estate commission, about this. It wasn't much better. Here's some best practices. It was like 2. Here's a bulletin we put out, making sure people check their IDs, which, by the way, is not good enough. I'll tell you about that in a second. But, we really don't know. That dumbfounded me as well, because I'm here to tell you, if you guys are involved on a vacant land transaction and it goes through and someone finds out in a year or 2, we're all getting sued, because their lawyer is going to tell them, sue everyone, and we'll see how it lands. And they're going to file commission claims and state bar claims on us. And we're going to need to show the commission and the state bar, here's what we did to try to prevent this. Here's where Zeno asked you what you want us to do, and you were absolutely no help. So don't come after me too hard on this. But they were absolutely no help. I couldn't figure out why they were absolutely no help. And so I kept diving. I talked to E&O insurance providers, professional liability insurance providers, title insurance providers. What's going on with this? Everyone's telling me it's such a big deal. but no one seems to know what's going to happen, who's liable, what are we going to get in trouble with our licensure boards? What am I don't even know what I'm supposed to do with them. I'm preventing them kind of as a courtesy. I'm representing my client, of course, and trying to make sure they don't get defrauded, but we're all getting defrauded. I don't get paid extra for this. I didn't go to law school to prevent vacant land fraud, from out of this, because they're never in the country, by the way. These are international players. I'm over my head here. Can I get some help from anyone? And the general consensus I got from E&O providers, professional liability insurance providers, title insurance companies, is that there is a storm coming, and it's nationwide, and we don't know the extent of it, and we don't know what the courts and our licensure boards or insurance companies, we don't know what anyone's going to do, because it's going to be a mess. There are going to be people, like I said, who have built houses. Do you take their house away? The seller never sold their property. What do you do there? It's property's unique. So it's a little bit more than just saying, hey, they sold it for 50, here's 50. Seller might say, I would have never sold that for 50. I want that piece of property. So what do we do there? Do we just give them 50? Maybe it's years later and it's now worth 70. Who's going to pay that? Do we make the current owners of the land who didn't build a house, do we leave that with them, or do we give it back to the seller? And in all of this, who pays for all of this? None of this is free. It's very expensive litigation. Guys, I have to tell you, I have to believe you're not going to be able to keep your commission. I have to believe the commission's going to say, you probably should have done X, Y, and Z. You at least got to return that. Nobody wants to return their commissions 2 years later. So we don't really know the extent of it. It's going to be a mess. So what do you do with that information? Thanks a lot, Zeno. What do you do with that information? You prepare and show that you're trying to prevent it, so that 2 or 3 years from now, when you do end up in Raleigh, potentially, you have to prepare for the worst, right? Hopefully it never happens. You do end up in Raleigh, you do end up in court, you say, here's what I did. I followed Zeno Lancaster's best practices that I'm going to email you, Alexis, and you can send it around if you want. Here's everything I did. What would you have had me do more? Because you didn't give me any information. You were no help, by the way. And here you are, thinking about disciplining me. What would you have had me do? And I think if you're able to show that you've done all you can in court and in front of your licensure board, worst case, you're as protected as you can be, right? Now I'll tell you this. On the other hand, if you go to Raleigh or court and you said, I wasn't that worried about it. Did you try it all to prevent this? No, I just believed them. I trusted them. I trusted my clients. Well, they weren't real. Nobody named Bob Smith exists. It's some foreign national using Bob Smith as a fake name. And I'm telling you right now, they expect more of their attorneys and their realtors, even if they're not telling us that when we ask them, right? There's no way they're there to protect the public from us. That's really what the bar and the commission is for. So I think it's going to be in your best interest to make sure you've done what you can to prevent this, and keep a log of that, by the way. Keep that evidence in your file, okay? But I am going to make this very easy for you towards the end. So if you feel like you have to memorize everything I'm saying, you don't, okay? I'm going to send this to Alexis to send around as she wants. But also, I'm going to talk to you about how you can frankly use me to take all this liability off, like we talked about earlier, so you don't have to take it on. Okay, so we talked about certified ID. So I'll tell you a story real quick. Now, this vacant land fraud situation happened to me 2 months ago. We prevented it. But I'm here to tell you, no one was asking these questions, okay? I'm going to keep with Bob Smith. Bob Smith, this wasn't his name, obviously, but Bob Smith came to a listing agent, wanted to sell his vacant land. I got both sides of the deal. Yay, no. I'm going to do the buyer's closing, and I'm going to do seller documents for the seller. I love that kind of thing. Did it paid a little bit more. Buyer agent, listing agent is both happy. So, let's do a quick closing on this. You can do quick closings. You don't shut up about it. And yeah, let's do it. Let's do it, agents. I'd love to work with you. First time working with this listing agent. I'm like, yes, a new working relationship I get to foster. And we get into it. I now have tasks on every vacant land deal we get. And by the way, I've never had as a percentage of my closing more vacant land deals, which is a little scary if you think about it. And so we do our title search. Bob Smith owns it. That's what the public record says. That's who the seller is, supposedly, on the contract. And in our tasks, we have a whole vacant land hoop that we jump through with the listing agents, and their seller attorney if they're using a different attorney. In my experience, the seller attorney never knows. They're in my position. They got a contract. They don't know the sellers. That's almost always the case. Sometimes they do know them. But I reached out and he said, hey, listing agent, do you know the seller? We're trying to combat vacant land fraud. It's on the rise. Do you know the seller? Can you give me a little bit of history on how you got this listing? And she goes, no, I guess I don't know them. They'd reached out to me to list their property. I hadn't really even thought about it. This was 2 months ago. And I said, okay, that doesn't mean they're fraud. That doesn't mean they've been defrauded, right? That could happen. That's how most of you meet your clients. You don't maybe not know them. So I'm like, okay, let's jump through some hoops and see if we can get comfortable with them. And I told her, I said, listing agent, I don't know your seller. And they weren't signing in my office. They were signing remotely, right? So I'm like, I can't vouch for them, but I can help you get comfortable for it so that you can. But if you can't, I can't close it because I have to assume it's vacant land fraud. If nobody can vouch for the identity of this person, this is something we have to worry about now. And because these fraudsters, they hope and pray that you won't ask these questions. That's how they're getting away with this. And if you don't ask these questions, I think you're going to get in trouble one day. Okay. So that's where we are. So in my situation, my guy, Bob Smith, the seller, my client, was in Virginia getting cancer treatment. He needed to sell this vacant land to pay for his cancer treatment. He needed to sell it quickly. And my gosh, Zeno, stop asking questions. I'm sick. I have cancer. Please, I'm in doctor's appointments getting treatments all day today. I can't. Please stop bothering me. Just get this done. That's how soulless these fraudsters are. And they hope that you guys will empathize with them and be like, you're right. I'm sorry to bother you. I hope you're feeling better today. We're going to get this pushed through for you. They're hoping you'll do that. So we kept pushing. He sent over the most beautiful front and back North Carolina driver's license I've ever seen. It had the address on the tax bill, which was a local North Carolina address on the ID. Had a picture of him, everything. You cannot rely on IDs alone, guys. Don't ever do it. It was a fake ID. And it helps to get IDs. You can't rely on that. So he sent that over, and I'm sitting here like, well, maybe it is the real guy, and which is okay. But man, it just really smelled like vacant land fraud. So the listing agent was the most uncomfortable about it as we talked, right? So she goes to the address on the ID and said, that's supposedly where he lives. He's up in Virginia getting cancer treatment. She looked at GIS. I mean, she went through a lot of different things and said, well, it's the same last name across the street. I'm going to go, that's probably family. I'm going to go knock on the door and see if they know him. And maybe if it's family. She knocks on the door. The guy answers, it's his brother. And she goes, hey, Bob Smith hired me to sell his vacant land. And he's up there in Virginia getting cancer treatment. I just wanted to, I'm trying to make sure it's him. I haven't met him, trying to make sure I'm working with the real Bob Smith. And his brother said, I didn't know my brother had cancer, and freaks out. And he said, but he's not in Virginia. He's over there at his house. And she walks across the street and meets the real Bob Smith in his house, in the address on the ID that we were all sent. And he says, I don't have cancer, thank goodness. And I'm not selling my vacant land. I inherited that. I'm not selling it. And so I take that information to my Bob Smith and say, hey, Bob, we pretty much know it's vacant land fraud at that point, right? I said, hey, Bob, hey, there's a man living in your home. Do you want me to call the police? And one way you're going to see my best practices to find out if these fraudsters is they will respond to you irrationally. He responded to me, Zeno, I'm ready to sign when you are. Please get this done. In other words, wouldn't you want to call the police if someone was in your home? He completely disregarded that whole thing. I knew right then and there it was vacant land fraud, and we stopped the whole thing. Now, what happened is my buyers thanked me profusely and walked away. I've never met the sellers because we never even engaged with the real owner. I didn't get paid, neither did the realtors, but we just did this great deed for everyone involved. So that's kind of the negative silver lining on vacant land fraud, is that if you catch it, you might not get paid, but it's what you got to do. And no one has assigned us this responsibility. It's not in our job descriptions, but I think they're going to make that happen. The law is way behind it. It's probably going to be a federal law because it's happening nationwide. But I'm here to tell you, North Carolina is one of the biggest culprits. We are a pure race state, meaning the first of the courthouse wins, and we are built for speed here on real estate closings. So, and frankly, we're just a busy state with real estate, as you guys know, compared to a lot of the other states. So it is being attacked in a big way. And I've come up with best practices. Now, these are Zeno's best practices. And I know it looks like a lot. It's not as bad as it looks. I'm going to email this to Alexis. I've come up with these. They're not perfect because they're mine. I've come up with these because State Bar and the Commission has not. And I feel like we got to do something. And so these are the best practices I've come up with. Now, 2 or 3 of these are, in my opinion, slam dunks on what you can do to prevent vacant land fraud. But I'm going to read through some of them pretty quickly. So I've got them split up on this page, by the way, for buyer's agents, for listing agents, and then I've got some red flags to look out for. So it helps on all the ends because we have to work together on this. So buyer's agents, how do you avoid vacant land fraud? Ask the listing agent if they know the seller right away. Right away when you're saying, hey, we love the vacant land you have for sale. Do you know the seller? It's a good way to get that conversation started early. And then you can tag me in and I'll help them figure it out if they don't. If the seller asks for due diligence money to be wired, guys, you are under no obligation to ever wire due diligence money. My humble opinion is never do it. There's no obligation to do it. There's several other ways to pay due diligence. And if someone is requiring you to wire due diligence money, that's a huge red flag. You do you. But I'm telling you, once it's gone, it's gone. And in a recent example in Wilmington, the agent had to repay the due diligence money to her client because it was fraud. And she said, yeah, wire it, it's fine. When she said, yeah, wire it, it's fine, she took on that liability I try to get them not to do. And she gave bad advice to her client. And so she had to return that due diligence money, and it was not nothing. I'm going to tell you that. So work with a listing agent to ask the seller specific testing information. This one's kind of a funny quirk, but a realtor told me they do it. Hey, there's a big tree in the back corner. Is that on the property? Can we cut it down? And there's no tree. And so if the Bob Smith says, yeah, cut it down. Well, come on, Bob, there's no tree on the real property. That's a red flag that this is vacant land fraud. That's a little quirky though, because you're kind of tricking your potentially correct client. So be careful with that one, I guess. Look into fraud guard and fraud alerts. So Alexis, I'll send this to you as well. I have an alphabetized list of counties that offer fraud alerts. And the links are on there, so I'll email it to you so you can click, send that out and people can click them. Fraud alerts, for example, in my home county, Buncombe County, it was free to sign up. It took me about 3 minutes. Anytime Zeno Lancaster gets recorded on any document in Buncombe County, I get a text and an email immediately saying, hey, something's been recorded in your name. Doesn't cost a dime. Now, I don't know that it doesn't cost a dime in every county, but I haven't found one that they charge for it yet. And I've had realtors say, well, Zeno, at that point, isn't it already recorded? Well, yes, but you want to catch, if you catch this stuff the day of or the week of or whatever, that's much easier to fix and try to prosecute and fix as opposed to 2 years later, and when they're coming at you asking you these questions. So if you've got people buying vacant land, set them up on these fraud alerts. I think it's a great value add you guys can offer your clients, right? And it helps protect them against this sort of thing down the road. You can also sign up for this yourself, by the way. All right. There's going to be a few shameless plugs in here. I know you guys are expecting those. Make sure you're working with an attorney who's looking into this sort of thing. I would love to help you with that. That's a value I'll offer you guys at no extra charge, right? Text or call me. 828-226-1493 is my cell phone. If you text me right now, it's going to pop up on my screen here. I'm happy to help with this kind of thing. I think it's important that we try to help, and I've worked really hard to build sort of a ironclad prevention method here. Okay. Let's see. Again, shameless plug. If you're not comfortable with who the seller is and you're putting in an offer on that property, Ask the seller to use Lancaster Law Firm because we are going to make them jump through those hoops. I'm here to tell you, I do this every month. We've got several of these. I have attorneys tell me to shut up, to not worry about this. This is not our job. I have other agents get really pissy about it. But that's rare, by the way. But it does happen. There are people that don't care about this stuff, and you might be using them. So be very careful, because if you refer to a lawyer who's not looking into this sort of thing, is there liability there? I don't know. We're going to find out, right? So ask the listing agent on an offer you're putting in, hey, would you mind using Lancaster Law Firm on this one as well, so that we can, if you don't know the client, so he can make sure that the client's who they say they are. He's going to help us do that. I think a lot of the listing agents, if their attorney already isn't doing that, would be very happy with that we're helping protect their liability as well. All right. And I'll tell you this, the silver lining, if they're a fraudster, they don't care what lawyer you use. Never. They just want to get it done, right? They're pushing to get it done quickly. So if they are fraudulent, they're not going to mind at all switching to me, and then we'll catch them. Okay. All right. Listing agents, how can you help prevent it? So number one on here, ask for a scan of their IDs. You can do that, and I think it's smart. It is not enough. So just keep that in mind. I think it's a good idea, but it's not enough. Check the mailing address on the property tax bill and see where these people are supposedly located. If they're wanting documents sent to them in California, but they have a local address or a Virginia address or whatever, why? Ask what happened there, and see what kind of answer you get. If it's just get it done, it's a big red flag. Check to see, again, on fraud guards. Call the county and say, hey, does Bob Smith have a fraud guard set up here? Let's see. If you see this was previously listed with another agent and it didn't close, maybe call that agent and say, hey, was this vacant land fraud? I've been asked to list it. I'm curious why it didn't close. I know that some MLSs I've heard are starting to put this in, like, hey, everyone, this MLS listing, which is now canceled or whatever, it was a fraud attempt. So be advised. I don't know that they're all doing that, though. You have bigger things to think about right now. If any of this is peeving off your client irrationally, that is a red flag. Now, we all know clients are going to client. But if something, hey, we're looking into this just to protect you, and they're like, damn it, Sally, I need you to do this right now. Stop asking me these questions. That is a big red flag. Okay. So be really careful with that. And again, number 7, listing agents, make sure your attorney's looking into this for you. If you're approached by a seller and you really want this listing, but you're not sure whether you should take it, I have them do it now. Text or call me. I'll help you get comfortable with that. And so we can get on board with that. I will tell you another way to do this, listing agents. See if they'll Zoom call with you. I'm telling you, that is an easy problem for these fraudsters to fix. They can hire someone who's got the most beautiful English accent to talk to you about how they're Bob Smith. So be really careful. I see someone asked about reverse phone lookups. Yeah, you can do that too. You guys have that wonderful Forewarn app or whatever. You can look people up there. But again, it's not always going to be determinable. And a lot of times these fraudsters won't get on the phone with you. They won't get on Zoom with you. They just want to do everything by email so they can pretend to be someone. So I don't want you guys to miss a listing because someone wants to communicate by email only because they're an introvert, right? But it's a red flag that we can help jump through. Now, some more of these red flags. They're traveling, sometimes abroad. They can't meet in person. They have to do everything by email. That's a red flag. Not enough by itself, but a red flag to watch for. The seller has some kind of emergency or medical procedure, like in my story. They need a quick sell and will accept substantially less than full price if they can close in a very short time, probably giving you guys a bonus. Wouldn't you like to make more money? We'll sell this in a week. It's going to be easy. The email address or phone numbers are clearly from another country. Now, that sounds pretty obvious, but you'd be surprised who does this when they look at things like that, just to get the listing. The photo IDs, such as driver license, are barely legible. Now, that wasn't my experience. I had a beautiful ID that was fake. But if they are barely legible, maybe that's one of the poorer fraudsters and they just can't figure out how to do it correctly, So that's a red flag. All right, opposite, other hand of wiring due diligence money. Seller doesn't require any. Just get it closed quickly. Whatever incentivizes that buyer to get it closed quickly. Listen, if you'll close in a week, buyer, we don't even need any due diligence money. They're incentivizing you to do it fast without asking questions. No earnest money, no deposits are needed. Let's just get it done. The seller makes constant excuses for not returning, phone calls or whatever. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm busy today. I'll shoot you an email, that kind of thing. People do that all the time in general. You guys know that. So it's not easy to catch every time. You're almost used to it these days. You have to be careful with that. The seller gets very angry at the broker and Zeno as the transaction gets closer to closing and there's pressure being applied for them to identify themselves. That is a red flag. In this day and age, most people are very used to having to identify themselves on things because of all the fraud out there. They're getting angry irrationally. They're either probably 80, 90 years old, but they'll get it eventually, especially after I get on a call with them, or they're fraudulent. You meet the actual property owner at the local address listed on the tax bill. So that one sounds funny, but that's exactly what happened with my listing agent on this deal. That is a big red flag. If you meet the actual owner at the property listed on their tax bill, that's probably a red flag that whoever you're dealing with is not real, right? All right, shameless plug again, but this is a slam dunk prevention method. They are remote and refuse to use our proprietary come to you closing. So with our come to you closings, I'm sending my people anywhere in the country to these people. These people are qualified notaries. They are legitimate. They bring the paperwork. They take care of getting it back to us. And if we're doing it in a county where the property is, or at your office, at the favorite brewery, coffee shop, the house they're selling, the house they're buying, it's not vacant land fraud. So if I've got someone in California, we can't confirm them in any other way, but they'll use my service, it's not fraud. These vacant land fraudsters aren't in the United States. They're where they can't be prosecuted. So if they'll use my people, we can prevent that. So that is a slam dunk method to prevention. If your seller says, listen, I don't use my phone, I like to use email, but I'll show up at Zeno's office and sign documents, I'm fine with that. These fraudsters aren't coming into attorneys' offices yet and purporting to be people. Again, they're probably not in the United States at all. So that's a good way. That's a slam dunk method to prevent it. So either they're signing in our office or they're signing with our people, is a great way to prevent this vacant land fraud. So frankly, it's not happening with my clients. It might be happening with other law firms and other agents, but it's not happening with my clients because we're doing this. So I'll tell you guys another one. And this one I need to update on my sheet. Listing agents, one amazing way to, and it's going to convince me, by the way, too, if we have a deal together. One amazing way to find out if your seller is fraudulent, or to confirm that they're not. Let's go the opposite way. To confirm that they're not, do they have a copy of their settlement statement from when they purchased, a copy of their title insurance, something that's not public record that they wouldn't have otherwise? If they have a copy of their settlement statement or their title insurance policy or what have you, they're almost certainly not fraudulent. I don't know how they would have gotten that paperwork otherwise. You're never going to know 100%. These fraudsters work on new fraud all the time, but that's a really good way to determine that they're the real person. And again, I can be the one to ask for that. If you're ever in a position where you think you're going to annoy the client, let me annoy the client. I'll explain it to them in a way that why it's needed. And then you can be these are hoops you have to jump through, these crazy attorneys, So let me do that. And then, we can make sure it's taken care of without making any sour milk between you and your clients themselves. Okay. Any questions before I tell you guys about our come to you closing service? Any questions about vacant land fraud?
Anybody have any questions? If you do, just open up your mics, shoot them out. Dude, Zeno, you're doing so good. No questions means your presentation's on point.
I hope so. You guys, again, you can text or call me anytime if you do have questions. Again, you don't need to memorize any of that, because when you have this come up 3 months from now, you're going to be like, what did Zeno say about that? Text or call me. We'll talk. It's for me to keep up with this stuff. I need you guys finding houses to sell and buy. Let me handle this. So these are things for your for your use, and please use it. But in no way feel like you have to memorize this stuff. You should be working with attorneys that will help you do this at no cost when you need it. So to that end, I'm going to do my pitch. So I appreciate you guys standing through my class. Here's what you get with our law firm. So again, we're not reinventing the wheel. I'm not just another attorney telling you we can do closings, although we can do closings. We are offering a service no one else offers, and I'll talk to you about what that is. So one thing we do, here's some of the things you might see from other attorneys, but that we offer and you need to know about. I want to give you guys the opportunity to get more closings. And every week we help 3 or 4 realtors, which is a lot when you think about it, get closings they would not have gotten without our help. Now, most of the time, you guys don't need my help on that, but there are times it comes up. So here's some examples. If you have a buyer that's on the fence about putting in an offer over X, X could be anything. X could be short-term rental ability. It could be high-speed internet. I've had true examples, a purple fence. They wanted to build a purple fence and they weren't sure if they could. Or they wanted chickens. They wanted to have a chicken coop. And it was, especially the chicken coop example, was back in 3% loans. Highest and best is in 2 hours. What do we do, Zeno? They don't, they want to have a chicken coop. This is their dream home, but they will not buy it if they can't have a chicken coop. And we can't afford to lose 10 grand in due diligence or 5 grand or whatever, because if they do, we may not be able to put in another offer for a year. They're very tight on money, all that. We did an addendum for them, made the whole thing contingent on their ability to have a chicken coop or high-speed internet or a purple fence. And look, if the sellers won't sign this, then either the offer wasn't competitive enough, and that has nothing to do with the addendum, or it's a pretty good indication they can't have a purple fence or a chicken coop, whatever that deal breaker is. So either way, it benefits your client, your buyer. But here's what it also does. It gives you the ability to get that offer in, compete, and potentially get that under contract at no danger to your client. Because if we find out they can't have a purple fence, we get to back out and get our deposits back. We've seen agents be very successful every week on these. We draft them all the time for people. It gives you guys an at-bat at the commission. It gives your client an at-bat at the purchase. And we also do them for listing agents and sellers. The seller doesn't want the seller got a great offer on this house. I mean, a little too good. They're worried about it appraising. I've done addendums for sellers to say, listen, buyer, you're going to proceed with this closing under these terms. You know, if it appraises for X under, you're going to pay that, or you're going to come close. If it's way down here, fine. But if it's only 10 grand under, you're going to make up that difference. Otherwise, we're not accepting your offer. It got that deal done. And they wouldn't have done it otherwise. So if any of that helps you, reach out to us. It's free. Text or call me. It's free. Now my expectation is that I'm going to help you with the closing. That's why it's free. But I'm telling you, I've never had a client say, thanks for helping me get under contract. We want to use another lawyer, though. I've never had that happen. So keep that in mind if we can be helpful. We also give our main services. Now we've got great communication and all this other stuff. We wire, not that you guys need this, we wire commissions. If EXP ever needs wired commissions, though, we do them. And a lot of attorneys aren't doing that. Also, a lot of attorneys aren't wiring proceeds anymore at all. So we still do that. You're never going to have a problem with that. I think your sellers are all going to want wired commissions. Again, these are some things you might have with your other attorneys. Here's what you don't have with them. We will come to your clients anywhere in the country. We can sign at the home they're selling, the home they're buying, wherever they are outside of North Carolina, of course. Their favorite brewery, their favorite coffee shop. It is such a well-received service that even the people in our locals, where we have offices, are starting to opt into it. If we sign in the county where the property is, we don't even charge the client for it. We eat that cost. So it's as if we had an office there. Clients love it. Agents love it because we have an electronic earnest money process. You don't have to even mail or wire or anything with earnest money if you don't want to. Of course, we're fine getting checks if that's how you want to do it. But basically, you don't have to drive at all. No one has to get earnest money to us physically if they don't want to. No one has to come into a closing on my schedule or my conference room schedule. They can pick the time, date, and location of their closing, often at no extra charge to them. I send out amongst other things, a one-pager on how these signings work when they choose to do them. It's a video of me going through what the paperwork's going to look like. We send that out to everyone. And then, of course, we can wire proceeds and all of that. Agents, it's your time back, which gives you more time is money. If you're spending time, you're spending money. It gives you your time back to go get more closings. Between that and our addendums, I think you'll see that we can help you every now and then get that extra closing under contract. And I haven't found another law office offering these types of things. Oh, and I forgot one very important piece. No matter where they're signing in the country, we can always record and disperse same day. I've not met another law office in the state that will do that. So if we're signing in California, we can record and disperse same day. If I'm signing in Wilmington, using our come to you service, you don't have to wait on the documents to get back the next day. And that's what every other law firm I've ever seen does. We can record and disperse the same day as if we had an office there. So my goal is to be your closing attorney in all 100 counties because we have a presence there. It doesn't cost you anything, and we're going to otherwise beat everyone else on the other services. So that's my spiel, guys. I'm going to send these documents to Alexis. Text or call me anytime. We'd love to work with you, and I appreciate your time.
Yay. Any questions, anybody, for Zeno? If not, I am going to thank him profusely for coming in today. Definitely please email me those documents and I'll get them out to everyone. I think both of these topics, especially the land fraud, was definitely needed for us to learn more about and kind of know how to combat it. So we thank you so much, Zeno. Guys, I will get you with the documents, his information. I'm telling you, if you want the smoothest, easiest closing that you'll ever have, you definitely want to go with his closing attorney for closing. Zeno, thank you so much for your time, and I'll go ahead and let you go. Guys, I'm going to stop recording.